So welcome to Civic Lab. As you all know, we're a do tank. We just don't talk the talk, we walk the walk. So we're all about expanding the civic imagination for Chicago's future. We have a number of tools for organizations interested in helping their communities, and that includes our Power Institute, where we have a wealth of information about um, organizing for power and change in your organization. We work a lot around our TIF illumination project. We really would like you all to learn more about that and find out about that. It affects every community in Chicago. And then our premier publication right now is Chicago is Not Broke. That really breaks down the city's finances and what we can do about changing that for in the benefit of our community. So again, check those resources out. Um, we're your trainers for today. Your humble speaker right now is Philip Thomas. I am a former program officer, senior program officer at the for community development at the Chicago Community Trust. A former program officer at the Woods Fund of Chicago that did a lot in public policy, organizing, and activism. Worked in government. I've worked in public policy analysis and worked on political campaigns and the whole gamut of community activities. So really excited about sharing this information with you. And then our other presenter today is Mr. Tom Tresser. Uh, the guy literally wrote the book. All right, so he knows what he's talking about, and really interested and excited to hear him share impart his knowledge on this subject matter to you all today because he knows a lot about it.
Thanks,
So,
Phil. Yeah, I'm Tom Tresser. I call myself a civic educator and public defender. The word public is very meaningful to me here, my family, and everyone at the Civic Lab. So if it has the word public in front of it, we love it and thinks it deserves to be lifted up, protected, and expanded. This particular workshop is very, very dear to me because we're dealing with a word that we don't often talk about in the nonprofit space, and that is the word power. And you'll see that I think we have a certain way of looking at it, and we hope to share that with you. And we also have a special guest coming up a little later. So I'm excited and again, always honored to be part of the awesome Illinois Access to Justice Coalition.
all right, all right. So here's our agenda today. Quickly, Tom mentioned power, and it begs the question: power for what? And the shorthand for that is power for change. We're all about here changing our communities for the better, and so we'll go into that in detail. And then we have a big picture of the way we look at this whole area of civic engagement. We call it the five M's. And also the Paul Wellstone triangle about how you move civic engagement and power in communities. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the path to power. What are the mechanisms around that? And then we have a very special guest that's going to come that's from organizing, from community work, and became a candidate, was inspired to go into uh, politics, to be a candidate, to bring change. And we'll hear something about her journey. We'll get to explore that. So that we're really excited about that. And we'll get to ask her some questions. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, so the first question that I have for our attendees today is, what are we fighting for? Feel free to unmute and just shout it out, and also put it into chat. What are we fighting for? We are fighting. What's the big picture? Why are we doing what we're doing? What are we fighting for? equity and inclusion. So there is a lack of equity, a lack of inclusion.
That's a good one.
Sylvia, can you say a little bit more about that? Why are you fighting for equity and inclusion?
I'm thinking more specifically on, I guess, like the disinvestment of certain communities and how they're not represented and resources are not often made accessible to them. So when you speak about LGBTQ, immigrants, Black communities, most of them have been marginalized and continue to be.
Yeah, so where are public resources going? So if there's a problem, if there are obstacles in the way of a community that it needs help, it needs resources, whatever it is, a school, a clinic, or whatever it may be, and it's not, that help is not there, something's wrong. So money is flowing, public money is flowing all the time like a mighty river. It just seems to miss certain places, doesn't it? So equity and inclusion is a big two words that to me stands for a lot. When you said that, it stands for a lot. What are we fighting for? What are you fighting for out there? Come on, help us out. What are you fighting for?
1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for?
Used to march in the old Union Hall, you know.
That's right.
Basic human rights, Diego.
There we go. That's a good one.
All right. So can you speak to that, please?
I wrote that because I think it's the very basis of a lot of the things that we do, a lot of the fighting, if you will. I think different organizations might have a different, like a different angle on what they're specifically fighting for, but I think ultimately that should be a consensus for everyone here, basic human rights.
Right. So there's a sense that there's a basic decency or fairness, maybe. So when I hear someone saying there's a lack of rights, that tells me that there's a presence of something else. There's a presence of unfairness. There's a presence of discrimination, of ignorance, of fear, maybe, hatred, perhaps, and leading to exclusion. So I'm not going to help you. I don't like you. I don't know about you. I fear you. I hate you. Whatever those emotions are, that causes that unfairness to exist. And we're trying to remedy that at the heart to make everyone included, not excluded. And also partly when I hear this, and this could be just me, I'm hearing there's a lack of love. So I can't exclude you if I love you, but if I hate you or don't know you, or I fear you, I can easily exclude you, can I? Yeah. At the Civic Lab, we actually talk about civic love as a necessary condition for our body politic. What are we fighting for? Come on, what are we fighting for? These are good things, worth the fight, I'd say.
So Tom, I have a question for you.
Yes.
This
go
is
ahead.
Felicia from Illinois Legal Aid Online. So how do we fight a feeling?
Fight a
So
feeling.
or the feeling that you don't, or the emotion of, well, I don't like you. I don't, because we cannot control that. That's a personal thing. We
Yes.
will always have people who are disagree with us or who are not, or with, they just don't have that. How do you convert people
Yes.
to, yeah, I mean, it's hard to comprehend, to say, well, we talk about, we have to include everybody, we have to make sure that everybody is loving each other, but we really cannot force people to love each other. We can show compassion to people, we can, but how do you change the heart of somebody who does not like or who do not know how to love?
Oh, yeah. Well, our great activists, Cesar Chavez, Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Mae Hammer, so many wonderful fighters in our work. I think, struggled with that question. So on the one hand, I would say the short-term answer is, well, I'm not necessarily caring about your heart. I'm just going to make the legal strictures better. So I'm going to make the government equally fund all schools. I'm going to pass laws that allow everyone to vote and remove any barriers from voting. So you could say the civil rights movement was aimed at law, but it was also a movement about changing people's hearts as well. So I think our great leaders were very tactical in the short term. They said, okay, we're going to remove bad law that makes exclusions happen. So we want to make sure everyone can vote, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think they were modeling a loving behavior, and were preaching nonviolence and preaching love, hoping, foolishly maybe, I don't know, that they would convert people over the long term. So is
Yeah,
that helpful?
Yeah, I agree with you with Martin Luther King. He was, but he have to bring his his faith into this.
Yeah.
And it is difficult to do things within the faith community and not break that barrier that at the same time the law prohibits us to do the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
So that is very complicated to me. What we're fighting for justice for all. But to me, justice for all means education, because if you don't educate our public in civics, we don't have, we're fighting blind.
Yes.
And to me, that's what and this is why I attended all of this great programs that you do, the classes that we have, because it's very important to me to understand civics. And I think that's what our community is missing, learning about civics. Because that's the best way that they will defend themselves when they go to court. If they know their civics, they will not break the law. If they know their civics, they will not.
Yes.
Well, there's an
knowledge-
understanding in the word fight that there is opposition. Like, we have to fight for it. It also implies that if we don't fight for it, the things that we don't like will persist or get worse. So we're really talking about, in a way, holding up our responsibility as a civic being, as a citizen, in asserting our rights and working towards them. That's our pushback against the unjust, unequitable thing. If that pushback doesn't happen, it's just like if a bully smacks you upside the head every day, they'll just keep doing it. At some point, we have to assert ourselves, assert our rights and our position. And this is the human condition.
And I agree totally with the characterization of education is a way to fight. Because there are folk who don't want us to be educated. There are people who want to deny us this knowledge. There are people who want to keep you out of your schools or defund your schools. So one way to fight is, as you say, robust education for all, and lift up people so they can fight for themselves and know their own path. At the same time, the question of love is hovering over our work. And sometimes I don't feel very lovey to the other side that's doing all this on us. But at the same time, I feel I gotta love you. I gotta have more love. That's the only way I can say it. And on some days, I'm not a very, lovable guy. But I feel if the other side is embracing hatred and exclusion and nasty racist garbage and speaking lies, I feel like I need to be a positive, a person showing love. That's the only way I can say it. These are awesome observations that you have made, and we could spend probably the rest of the day
A whole thing on this.
talking about this. It's so important, why we fight, how we're fighting, and your insights. But let's just say, from our point of view, why we are fighting is for power. We're fighting for power, for justice. And I quote this book that I'm very fond of. It's a fairly new book. It's called Politics is for Power by Etienne Hirsch. And he is a scholar over at the Tisch College for Public Life, Civic Life at Tufts University. And this is what he says. Political hobbyism is consuming and participating in politics by obsessive news following and online slacktivism. I love that word, slacktivism. By feeling the need to offer a hot take for each daily political flare-up, by emoting and arguing and debating, almost all of this from behind the screen or with earphones on. This, he says, is a serious threat to democracy because it is taking well-meaning citizens away from pursuing power, and the power vacuum will be filled. Does that land with anybody? Does that statement land with anyone? We have to pursue power. Our politics is for pursuing power. Otherwise, we're just kind of treading water. Does anybody feel like there's a lot of slacktivism going on? You know, people clicking like online and thinking they're actually doing something, spending too much time online, maybe. If you do, you can just put into the chat or chime in. Basically, we're saying at the end of the day, if we who believe in justice and equity and beauty and prosperity, if we don't have more power at the end of the day than we did, then something's wrong. We're not pulling together in the way that we should be pulling together. I think that's what I'm trying to say here. And feel free to chime in if that lands for you, or if you think that's we're off point. That's all right. We can come back to this. In thinking about this work, the Civic Lab has come up with what we call the 5 M's. And think of it this way. Our work starts with that mission, with that call to action. Why are you fighting? What's the big picture? Or sometimes we ask the question, what does winning look like? What does winning look like for the Resurrection Project? What does winning look like for the entire Illinois Access to Justice Coalition? So imagine Illinois, 5 years from now. What's that vision? Is it going to be the same? And we just have more lawyers doing more eviction cases, and we got more ICE cases. We're dealing with more rent and evictions and whatnot. So we just have more lawyers able to take care of our people, or more caseworkers. Is that what winning looks like, or is there something else? So that's what we call the mission. What's the big mission that drives us? And then from that mission, we derive the message. How are we going to speak that message, mission? How are we going to make people excited about it and get them on our side and get them energized by that mission, which then speaks to the members. Who should be with us? Who should be alongside us in fighting to get us to that better place? Who are the members? And these people could be directly affected by the mission that we're speaking of, and it could be allies, people who are maybe not so threatened, but they feel akin, they feel solidarity. And so who should be with us basically on our voyage to justice? Who are the members? And if you figure that out, now you can ask them for money. Now you can ask for resources. You can ask for volunteers. And it has to be in that order. I'm not going to volunteer for you or give you money if I'm not enrolled in your mission and have heard your message. It's just not going to happen. But I feel like a lot of times candidates and other cause leaders are asking for money and handouts and help and join me and help me. And you haven't quite explained why. You haven't articulated. You haven't got me excited about your vision and your mission. And then at the end of this little chain of thought comes momentum. So after time, are we heading in the right direction? Are we moving toward that better place, that we've imagined for ourselves in a year or 5 years? And if not, we must course correct. We have to have some way to go, wait a minute, this thing is not moving in the way it should be. We need to adjust. Now, the columns in this little chart, we first started a couple of workshops ago over in the middle under individuals. We talked about your own individual capacity. Where were you in your pedagogy? Where were you in the cycle of liberation? What are your skill sets? Can you organize? Can you balance a budget? Can you write a flyer? Can you work a meeting? Can you organize a coalition? We were talking about it from the point of view of the individual. In our second workshop, we were talking about organizations. So how is your organization set up to do this work? And those of you who are on our second workshop did a self-assessment, and you looked at your organization and you gave it a grade, and guess what? The grades weren't that high. So a lot of our organizations are obviously very busy delivering services every day, and they're not quite as powerful as they could be in this work of moving policy and power. Now, here we are in the third column today. We're speaking about the system. We're talking about coalitions of coalitions. We're talking about organizations of organizations. So while the Illinois Access to Justice is in one place with its 65 members, there's a housing coalition over here. There's a get rid of the bail coalition over there. There's a health coalition down the street. And I don't know if we're all working together. That would be a hard thing to do, isn't it? But if we're somehow all aligned across the whole state, that's moving the whole system forward. So that's what we're talking about over there in the systems. All right. Any questions or comments? Again, a lot that we're exploring here, but feel free to jump in at any time. All right. So the other way that we speak about this work is a very useful way to speak about it by our mentor, Paul Wellstone. Paul Wellstone was a history professor in Minnesota, and he decided to run for the United States Senate back in 1996. And it was such a long shot candidate, but he was very funny with his limited resources, and he managed to get elected and defeat a long-term incumbent. And he quickly became one of the Senate's most progressive members and a very thoughtful organizer, I must say, a student of history. And the way he talked about politics, the way he did his politics was with this triangle, which has become called the Wellstone Way or the Wellstone Triangle. And it starts down in the blue, where we're talking about community organizing, listening, one-on-ones, informal sessions with our people, formal community meetings where we're listening, we're hearing. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on in your life? What's keeping you up at night? All those kinds of questions where our people are speaking to us, and maybe they're surprising us. We thought something was happening, and they're telling us something else is happening that is meaningful to them. And so that work leads to the upper side, the red, where you're developing policies. So our community is telling us that all of a sudden there's a lot of evictions happening, and we must respond. And so here's some ways we might do that. We might have a rent pool. We might have a law that says this. We might put an action and go protest a bad landlord. There's lots of ways we might go and deal with this. And that's sorted out up there in the red. And you're looking for allies. You're looking for people who will help your effort or oppose your effort. And you're trying to neutralize your opponents and get to that better solution that the community was telling you about down over there in the blue. But here's the thing that he adds to it that I think that's so interesting. Along the way, we as organizers and nonprofit workers need to be looking for other leaders in the community who show up in this work. And we need to have a place for them to go so they can be trained in leadership skills, including running for office. And that includes everyone on this call should be thinking about themselves and everyone they know as possible candidates, or certainly people who can help candidates run. And of course, that's on your own time after, I was going to say 5 o'clock, but it's really more like 9 o'clock when you leave your workplace after all. And when we find someone who is a possible candidate, whether it's you on this call or one of your colleagues or someone that you know in the community who's a leader, we want to help that person actually run for office by training them and offering them other kinds of pathways. And then when that person does step up and run and win, they're not done. She's heading back into the blue area to come to those community meetings and to now be there as an elected official and to listen and to respond and said, yes, I hear you. I now will go and help you fight this thing that you're talking about back up in red. And so around and around we go with this model. Now, our guest speaker who will be joining us in about a half an hour is someone who's actually done this. She has actually gone through that cycle, and you'll hear from her in a little while. But we think that this is a good way to think about the process. It goes through time, and it's just like a cycle. And what I'm going to say is that our organizations collectively are very good at what's down there in the blue, and somewhat good, not awesomeness in red, showing improvement in our ability to move policy in red, but we kind of are not very good at all over there in the green. And we talked about in our second workshop the many activities that our nonprofits can do safely and robustly in the green area in terms of voter registration, voter mobilization, issue campaigns, even candidate forums. It's perfectly acceptable for you to invite all the candidates for an alderman that's going to be in your community, or a state representative, or even the mayor. You know, we're coming up on a mayor's race next year. And if these people want you to the votes of your people and your constituents, it's perfectly acceptable to invite candidates to your place of business or to a church or some other place, and have many organizations pitch in and have a set of questions that you generate from your constituents and your staff that you will give to these candidates and ask them to respond. So you could say to the 5 candidates showing up who are running for alderman in the 19th ward, for example, here are the 5 things that our people say are most important to them. What is your response? And you give those questions to the candidates before they show up, and how they respond will tell you whether they're taking you seriously or not, or whether they're going to be good for you. And all you can do is send those results and how those candidates respond back to your constituents. And you don't have to say anything. You're not endorsing, that's not permitted, but you are permitted to communicate their responses. Okay, so that's the 3 sections of the Wellstone Triangle. Where do you, if anyone wants to chime in and see and ask and tell us where they see themselves? Are you in the blue and the red? You know, how do you see yourself? Does this make sense? Have you attended a candidates forum, for example? That might be interesting. If anybody has done that. If any organization has hosted a candidates forum, this would be a great place to share that insight. Okay. Well, we share this with you in the spirit of stimulating some thoughts about how your organizations might participate in this work as we head into 2022. Of course, is an election year for the governor, for state reps, for some state senators. So there's a lot happening already in civics and in electoral politics. And for those of you who are in the city of Chicago, 2023, we will have aldermanic and mayoral elections. Okay, over to you, Phil.
All right, we're going to talk about how we build power, and we're going to cover what we think are the ways you build power for justice: gathering votes, developing candidates, winning elections to move our country to justice and to serving our communities. And so I think to kind of put this in the context that's relevant to our discussion, the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition itself, to me, represents a demonstration of political power and investment and activity in this realm, in the sense that it is something where this money came out of the legislature. And many of you were at our earlier discussions where we talked about the formation of this with the leaders and the lobbyists who went down to Stringfield and worked with the legislatures. What are the representatives there in the state house? What are they responding to? Well, they're responding to their constituencies, their votes. They want the votes. They want to keep those votes to keep themselves in their position. And so what we understand then is that winning looks something like, in our case, the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition itself. And then to have a second year at enhanced funding, that's kind of winning. And that's winning on, on the level of what we were seeing at that point, getting money for these services. But what does winning ultimately look like when we're talking about justice? If we're talking about justice in the immigration field, and I want you to think imaginatively, what does that really look like? If you really had justice there, would you need so many services? Or would they be different kinds of services? What is our big goal? We call it a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. Something that is your utopia. It's something like what Tom was talking about love. You have to be audacious and bold enough to think, what is our big picture when we're thinking about equity and justice, the things that we just talked about? We tend to look at them in a frame of austerity. No, that's too much. Oh, that's outside of what is possible for us now. If we break that down in our imagination and take it in steps, things that we're doing today were thought to be impossible or out of reach years ago. So winning, we have to have a clear idea of what we mean by winning, and then move our activities forward in this realm to win. So I'd like anybody that's thinking about what they do now from the standpoint of their organization, or the idea of winning in this space of immigration, of legal services, justice for immigrant communities, for marginalized communities. What does that mean for you? What is winning ultimately? So next slide, please. Now, in this, we're talking about the molecules then of power, where we mobilize our community and move the political system, which politics, if you think about it in its most broad sense, is just conflict resolution. In the best of all worlds, there's an old saying, where you stand depends on where you sit. Where you stand on something depends on where you sit. And if we think about it then that way, there are naturally in any settings, we're going to have different perspectives, and there's going to be conflict when we think about allocating resources or how we're going to move. And in this system, and we're blessed to be in what's called democracy, where we are empowered to be able to voice our vision of change and change who our leadership is on a periodic basis. And that molecule there is called voting. It is what we're saying, everybody, every citizen has the right, the privilege, and really the responsibility to do on behalf of putting their perspective out. So if we think of it that way, getting people registered to vote is the building block. It's the substance of electoral power. It's like each vote is atom by atom. It's molecule by molecule. And there's a continuous process that never stops. So if we think about it that way, particularly in the realm we're in, all of our organizations must have voter registration efforts. We showed in our last presentation that the level of voter and political activity in our sector is way under it should be, given our numbers. So we have to have ongoing avenues for our stakeholders to register to vote. Then, if we're talking about moving something, we have to know what our people want. So we have to poll our people. We have to educate, listen, and learn and lead. Engage our people, because our participants, our community members, they will surface the issues for us so that then we can bring that to the electoral leadership or the people that want to be our electoral leaders. And that's why Tom's discussion of candidates forum was very important, because there's nothing about our charters there's nothing in the IRS code that says that we cannot have candidate forum. And because it's so important to our existence and our mission, we should hold them. We should hold these forums. We should have surveys of our people in our communities to know what issues they want. We should have activity, these activities and these forums, these opportunities to be in front of the people that want to represent us and ask them pointedly, where do you stand on our community's issues? What would you do in this place? Tell us why we should vote for you. And that is the first step of being able to hold them accountable. Because ultimately, whoever gets in that position, they know they're accountable to the people that put them there. So you can turn these issues into a questionnaire. You can send them all to the candidates, invite them to your space. You can, and what you want to do is broadcast their responses. You want to let people know in your community what they said and hold them to them. And this is nonpartisan. This has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. Your organization is not endorsing any of these candidates. It's just educating your public on the issues, so they have something meaningful to hold those candidates to 2 years down the line or 4 years down the line, depending on the term. So you're not endorsing, you're just educating. And if it just so happens that one of these candidates hits all the buttons that your poll of your community and your community voice says is interested in, then it's not an endorsement, it's just a recognition of who's closer to what our agenda is. So again, we think you should have a candidate forum based on what everybody on this call is doing. If you've done one, we'd love to hear about it. You could share it, let us know if you've done one candidate forum. If somebody wants to talk about a candidates forum, again, that they put on or attended, just a great time. We'd love to hear some stories.
Claudia put something in the chat.
So Claudia, would you like to?
Sure, you can just excuse me. My kids have been sick and I think I'm getting sick now too. But yeah, it was for a previous organization that I've been working for. And I mentioned that it was really powerful because it really was put together by the organizational leaders, right? It was for, I think we did it a couple of times for like local aldermen. We also did it for the mayor as well, a couple of mayoral races. And it was really powerful. Like I said, leaders from the community put it together. Many times, I've been doing immigration organizing. Many times it was, community members that thought that they could not, participate in stuff like this, right? So very empowering, right, for a person to know and realize that one, they have a voice, right? And there's different ways that they can exercise it themselves. And then once, like you mentioned, once you hear from the candidates, then people can make up, can make their own, make their own selection based on what the candidates, responded to the question. So the questions are always key, right? And the questions are also put together by the community. What do they want to learn about the candidates? What's important to the community? So it was always like very eye-opening too, to see, what sometimes you expected a certain candidate to answer in a certain way, or you thought that they, were going to support different items in a certain way. And, the community, you'd be surprised at what you hear and what you didn't hear, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, really empowering.
I'm really interested in this empowering discussion, given that you have an immigrant community where people come from other countries with other kind of governmental democratic positions, and you come here and you have the kind of specter of ICE or people worried about maybe their status or do they have the right to do these things. And I can see how your organization putting people together like that empowers them, and maybe and also strengthens the organization itself.
And let me say this: imagine, Claudia, and that you did that same exercise like for the next cycle, but in the meantime, that is to say, in between elections, your organization with its colleagues registered 1,000 people to vote in that area. How much more powerful would you think that forum would be? Do you think a candidate would miss attending the forum? If they knew.
Of course not.
No.
Many times they, we would have trouble putting these together because we have an overwhelming amount of candidates, and because we just couldn't fit it all, because they knew the power of the organization, right?
They knew the power of the organization. I want to make that like I'm going to put that over my fireplace now, like a quilt or something, a saying. I'm going to get a tattoo for my forehead. They knew the power of the organization. So if you don't show your power, if you didn't do those things that led up to the forum, the candidates can ignore you, couldn't they? They would think, why do I have to come to that forum? I have another place to be. I've got to be at the businessman's luncheon or whatever, I have other things to do. I don't need to go to your forum. But no, you make it in such a way through your voter registration, through your advocacy, through your showing up and your excellence, and your when you show up in other spaces, that the candidates cannot possibly miss attending your.
Showing up in numbers too, right? Like having, I remember these candidates forums having, 500, 600, 1,000 people, right? So definitely showing up.
You think a candidate's gonna forget that, particularly if they win? They're not.
This speaks to the what shall I say? The advantages, if you want to think of it this way, of the kinds of organizations that are on this call, because you know your community so well. You have so many relationships, deep relationships, long-lived relationships with so many people. You're in a better spot to call them out, to come to a meeting, what we would call turnout, as opposed to say, I don't know, an arts organization or some other kinds of organizations that may be in your community, but just don't simply have that advantage, if you want to think of it that way.
Or even the candidate themselves, particularly if they knew and they don't have a lot of name recognition. It's like it's power. It's in many of these sessions, we'll talk about what are your muscles for this or that. What are your fundraising muscles? What are your different kind of organizational muscles? Here, this is a flex. This is
a big one.
Political muscles.
Yeah, and again, we could spend all day talking about this, Claudia, and by saying, in order to make that forum happen, people had to spend time working on it. So there could have been the executive director, it could have been the program director, whoever it was inside the organization and your allies. They had to spend time, and therefore they thought this was important and worthy of their time and resources. And that's a commitment that the organizations have to make. If you're going to say, yeah, Tom, you've convinced me, I think my organization shall do a forum in 2023, plan for it now, build it in, get buy-in from your board and say, this is a perfectly acceptable and needed thing for our organization to do. As busy as we are serving the people, we need to create some bandwidth for it. So again, planning, putting the resources for this is part of our work. And we are encouraging you to think about this and even think about budgeting for these kinds of things in your annual plan for outreach and marketing and civics, and that looking into 2023 and even to 2024. And to say, well, who in our organization shall be our voter deputy registrar person? Is it the receptionist? Is it the person that you see when you walk in the door? Who should it be? And that everyone will know that Tom or Phil or whoever, that's our voter registrar person. And that's part of your job, Tom. So now in addition to opening the mail or doing whatever you do to help the organization, you must keep your voter registration deputy registrar credentials up to date. And that's part of your job. Again, that requires some organizational thinking. All right, Phil, let's close out with this slide before the break.
All right. So in a sense, if you were talking about what the example Tom is just talking about, what you're doing is leadership training and possibly candidate training. So you're building your internal muscle in the group, but you're also possibly identifying people who would be good to be in that arena themselves because they understand the community and they are connected to you and they're showing leadership potential. So how do you look at that? Because you want to be on the lookout for these kind of leaders in waiting. Well, the best leaders, it turns out, are the best followers. It's the people who demonstrate that commitment, who have something internal to them that makes them want to be the one that shows up, the one that organizes the thing. You're the steadfast person. Often they're not the loudest person or the person that you would notice the most if you're not looking at their real activity. So you want to look out for it as you're building these activities, the people who kind of naturally gravitate towards this and see the importance to it. Then you also want to have opportunities and other leadership development work going on with you. You want to have activities when you do these committees and events and actions. I mean, they're really a training ground, a proving ground for people in your organization, your constituents, your members, to give them an opportunity to serve and demonstrate their judgment, their passion, their organization, their skill. All of these, again, as Tom was saying, make our kind of organizations the ones where a leadership will emerge that has the qualities, the passion, the heart, the civic heart that we talk about, that will benefit your whole community, not just your organization or your satellite organizations, but they have the kind of instinct, the skill, the guts, and the persistence to actually be a successful candidate. So you want to have a way when these people come forward to invite them to a coalition of organizations, to candidates forum. Once you've emerged these people, you put them in the thing. And this is both in conjunction with a current election cycle, but also as an ongoing activity or the organization that is in your interest. It's in the interest of your organization to do this. And we want to make that clear that this isn't an abstract thing. So we at the Civic Lab, we do offer candidate training. We love those kind of workshops. So any kind of leadership training or anything like that. But otherwise, we do offer that kind of thing. And you can always get back with us to do that. So Tom, I think we're almost ready for a break.
Yes, sir. So we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we should be ready for our special guest.
Great.
I'll make you happy. I'll be home. I'll be beside the phone waiting for you. Why do you build me up, buttercup, baby, just to let
Okay, welcome back after a brief respite. Now it's time for our special guest, and to cue up our special guest, I want to bring Jane Lombardi to the microphone. Jane is the Director of Immigration Justice and Partnerships at the Resurrection Project, and our fearless leader here in the Illinois Access to Justice immigration cohort. So Jane, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. And thank you to our special guest, Representative Dagmara Avelar. Thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Representative Dagmara Avelar. Sorry, my cat is being very loud today. She wants her pets. So I have so much admiration and love and respect for Representative Avelar. She's serving her first term as the state representative of Illinois' 85th district and is the first Latina to represent that district. And many of you probably already know her. She's been an advocate for immigrant rights for many years, previously working as an organizer and most recently as program director of Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. She herself is an immigrant from Ecuador, and after moving to the US, she grew up and has lived in Bolingbrook ever since. The song that was playing, Build Me Up Buttercup, it's one of my favorite songs, and it just, specifically the line of building me up, it makes me think about our work and how we build each other up, build up our communities, and I think that's something that Rep. Avelar really embodies and has embodied throughout her career. We're so proud of you, so proud of your journey, and really lucky to have you as one of our legislative champions. And I couldn't have thought of a better person to join the session around engaging candidates, creating movements, and building community power. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we're excited to hear from you and hear about your candidate story and your experience so far as a legislator and what led you here. Thank you again for joining.
Oh my God, thank you, Jane, so much. I'm really getting goosebumps as you were talking about all of this. Thank you, everybody. Again, I'm Dagmara Avelar. I am a state representative, but advocate at heart. And that is something that I will not apologize for. And I'll tell you a little bit as to why I always say like I'm an advocate regardless of whatever title I hold. So just as to what Jane was saying, a lot of the work that I did prior to being a state representative was built around immigration, immigrant services, and organizing and building power in immigrant communities, for immigrant communities, by immigrant communities, in making sure that we are holding our electeds accountable, no matter whether or not we were registered voters or not. And I think that it's always really important for me to say that. So I'd say a little bit about my story, and I'll try to keep it to less than 10 minutes because I do want to have enough time for us to take any questions and have a discussion. But as it was said, I migrated from Ecuador at the age of 12 with my sister and my parents. And, you know, a lot of my experience in the US is the experience of somebody who was formerly undocumented for the first 13 years of my life here in the US, living in the suburbs. And I think that truly shaped who I am now, why I'm so passionate about the issue with regards to immigration, and most importantly, how, you know, the way that I was able to use the anger that I had around why our immigration system was broken and why I was frustrated about the fact that particularly suburban legislators, congressional legislators, were not hearing our plight for immigration reform, for the DREAM Act and all these other issues that we organize around, truly inspired me to look into organizing, not just as something that was a nice thing to do for our communities, but as something that we must do and that we must live, you know, by. So when I was in college, I actually got involved with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights as an organizer, back when I didn't even know what an organizer actually meant. And I think that many of us get into this work not knowing what organizing means, but knowing that we want to help, right? So I had somebody who came to the local church that I used to go to who said, we're looking for young people who want to advocate for the DREAM Act, who want to go to Washington, all expenses paid. And at that time, you know, I was telling my sister, I was like, well, we're undocumented, so we definitely can't take a flight, but we could take a 15-hour trip, you know, in a bus down to Washington. And, you know, the DREAM Act is something that is going to benefit us. And we talked to our parents, and, you know, I had the privilege of having such supportive parents who said, vayan, you know, go on and do what you have to do. And I think that truly, you know, it allowed me to see that while we were these two young ladies who lived in Bolingbrook, who were one of a few ESL students in the area, it made us feel part of a bigger group of people, of a bigger coalition, of a bigger system that, you know, that we could look at ourselves and say, you know, you are also facing the same issues. You are also facing the same struggles. And now we're going to fight together, right? So I truly see that as a turning point into, you know, my life as just a regular student who was just trying to get by, go to school, go to work, go to school, go to work, and just do the you know, what I had to do for my family. And looking into knowing that our self-determination is what was going to allow our families to thrive. So fast forward, and I know Ed is not here, but fun fact, Ed and I were part of the New Americans Democracy Project at ICER back in 2008 together. And, you know, one of the things that I remember, you know, one of the organizers of the program say is that while you might be undocumented, you actually do have a voice. And you might not be the one voting, but you can actually turn out 10 people to vote. And you could actually tell your story, and people will move through the story of self, right? And that's a lot of what organizing does, right? It activates that anger. It activates like that story of self to know that there's a lot of power to it. There's a lot of power to being vulnerable, and there's a lot of power to creating community. So that's how I got involved into civic engagement. Eventually, you know, prior to becoming a legislator for 6 years, I was the director of programs as well as program coordinator for the New Americans Initiative, not the Democracy Project, the New Americans Initiative. And actually, that's how I got to know many of you who are here on the Zoom. And I looked at a different way of civic engagement, from not just the work on the ground of getting voters out to vote, but instigating legal permanent residents to becoming citizens and to letting them know that their vote also means power. So a lot of the work that I did had to do with regards to making sure that we had a budget that worked for not just all you know, people who live in Illinois, but that also worked for immigrants, that also worked for Latinos, that also worked for communities that have been minoritized over and over again. And the way that we do that is we invest in programs that allow for people to be self-sufficient, and being self-sufficient. And I use self-sufficiency, but I also am very careful about what self-sufficiency means as well, because it truly does take a community to make sure that we're lifting each other up. So while self-sufficiency is something that we aspire to, you can't really aspire to self-sufficiency without also having a community behind you. And I think that that's a lot of the work that we all do, right? With the programs that we run, the programs that we participate in. Many of us have gone through either Access to Justice, have gone through using services with Immigrant Family Resource Program, have become citizens through the New Americans Initiative. And we want other people to continue to do it, because I think there's a lot to power, and there's a lot to be said about how do we build community through direct service that then engages people into civic engagement through the power of storytelling. So now let me put my legislative hat on. There's nothing more important when it comes to fighting for a budget than the story of constituents directly impacted by the services that you provide. There's nothing more important than the stories of constituents in specific districts, in all districts for that matter, about the services that you provide. Because it tells, when we say tell a story, you're putting now a face to the numbers, right? So I think that's what I wanted to keep it short, and wanted to end there to say that I'm honored to hold the position that I hold. Jane and I had this conversation over and over again with regards to like, how do we build each other up? I truly do believe that we have a legislature, and particularly with the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus, we have legislators that have come on board in the past couple of years who truly believe in bench building and not gatekeeping. What does that actually mean? It builds building each other up, right? It means not just walking behind a candidate, but walking alongside the candidate, get them into office, and while in office, still hold them accountable and be able to have real conversations. So I hope that today is that day where we engage in real conversations. So I'm really open to any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Representative Avelar. One question I have for you is, as a former organizer, now you're a legislator. So before you were trying to influence, the bad legislator or the indifferent legislator to do what you want. Now you're that person. Can you tell us a little bit about how your role as an organizer influences you, or how does it guide you?
Oh, I would say that 1000% it influences how I move in the legislature. One of the things that you do as a legislator is, you have your set of bills that you want to move, right? The bills that you sponsor. And a lot of the work that you do, for those of you who have been in Springfield, I remember when I was an advocate sitting in the chambers, and the clerk would start talking about resolutions, people would debate their issues. And I remember asking one of my mentors, I'm like, why are all these legislators not listening to the debate and actually speaking to each other, having side conversations, etc.? And I was never able to actually fully understand that until I was actually on the floor and knew that that was literally the only time that you actually got to negotiate your bills or to talk to people about any questions that they had about your bills. Because one of the things that a good legislator should actually do is work under legislation and run their numbers. When I say run their numbers, is get the firm commitment from legislators that they are going to vote yes on their legislation. Because the last thing that you want to do, unless it's strategic, is put something on the board that's going to fail. So a prime example of this, I think it's the Illinois Way Forward. So as many of you know, in the last not this spring session, but the one before, there was a particular legislation that was led in the House by Leader Lisa Hernandez, that amongst all the things that it was going to do, it was also going to close private detention, or actually was going to close detention centers, period, in the state of Illinois. And I remember Leader Hernandez asking me, would you be okay sharing your story? And I said, what do you mean? She's like, would you be okay sharing your story about what it's like to be living as somebody who's undocumented? And I'm like, absolutely. Right. I think, in the past 20 years, I've seen the movement around immigrant rights going from, you don't talk about your immigration status, it's very taboo, you don't say anything to anybody who you don't trust because they could always call immigration on you, to a level of empowerment that says, I am undocumented, I am unafraid. And what led to that shift in the narrative truly was community, right? So I said, yes, I'll be more than happy to talk about my story and what it was like to have to live day by day, waking up, not knowing if my parents were going to return home. And I kid you not, Tom, I had multiple legislators who either did not vote or voted for this bill, even though they knew that it was going to be detrimental for them for an election year. And they approached me and said, I could not vote for this. I could not go home knowing that this was something that impacted you. So when we talk about storytelling and putting a name to the number, putting a name to the struggle, putting a face to some of the things that many of our communities face, it's very powerful.
Amazing story. And I would just say this as a lesson for everyone else on this call. You could be in the same situation. And so the thing about what does a leader look like, Representative, is like, we're looking at leaders on this call right now. These are the leaders we need. And we at the Civic Lab are calling out with the loudest voice possible to all our allies in the nonprofit space to follow your path. So that's what I want to say. Other comments or questions for our special guest?
Philip, I think you were going to say something.
No, I'm shaking my head in agreement. So what I'm going to say is, please, this is an opportunity to talk to someone who's walked the walk and doesn't just talk the talk. And she was literally sitting where you were years ago.
Mhm.
And she that spark got her, and it started early and young. And she has followed through with that because she saw there was a role for her talents, her story, her perspective was not being in the conversation without her being there. And all of you represent that same possibility and potential.
Absolutely.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Tom, sometimes I'm asked to be quiet, not to talk too much. But this time I'm gonna take the opportunity to thank, first of all, Tom, thank you very much for doing this, and Jane, for giving us the opportunity to have this type of wonderful opportunities to speak among ourselves about these so important, crucial issues, and especially when we have such a special guest as Representative Avelar. You know, she's the epitome of what we all fight for, what we all look after, and what we all want our community to be. We've known her, you know, through her trajectory, and believe me, this is something that is for the history, because our community doesn't have access, and that's why we have so many problems. And that's why I say thank you very much, because your classes and seminars are so enlightening, but especially when we have somebody like Mara, you know, we're very proud of what she is and what she has become and what she's leaving as a legacy for the, you know, the next generation. You know, we all are here trying to make sense of what the society is coming about, what the society has become, and we try to make everybody understand that there has to be a balance. So Dagmara represents that, and I would like to ask the State Representative Dagmara, if you can please explain to us in talking about the generational transition, you know, how's the Latino caucus dealing with the progressive, the conservative, and the old school, so we can really come to an understanding of the real Latino agenda, especially for the advancement of the phantasmas, you know, the spirit, the phantoms, people who are invisible, which is the people that we're fighting for, all the undocumented. Thank you, Representative.
That's a great question, because I think if there is one thing that we all learned in the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus, so just a little bit of background, right? Like the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus, it's almost, let's see, it's almost been over 20 years since the caucus was came to exist. And actually, a fun fact that people like to tell us over and over again was that back when we had Representative Chuy Garcia and State Senator then Chuy Garcia and also Representative Miguel del Valle, the caucus was the African American Latino caucus, because we didn't have enough numbers, right? Fast forward 20 years now, and you have a Latino caucus that is represented by 15 people who identify as Latino from the Chicagoland area, including Chicago, as well as the Collier counties. And, you know, now going to ideologies, right? Because I think that's what we're trying to talk about right now, right? Like when it comes to ideology, one of the things that we knew as members of the Latino caucus, members that shared one identity, but who have different political ideologies, we knew that nothing was ever going to be able to get done if we were not together. So we have meetings regularly to talk about legislation. And when we talk about legislation, we talk about legislation within the spectrum of like, what happens to Latinos? What are the unintended consequences for Latinos, right? And we focus on that because that's what the Latino Caucus does. But then also, where do we show solidarity? And I think that in the past couple of years, what we've seen is that coalition building is what makes our caucus so powerful. The fact that 15 of us who come from progressive backgrounds, who come from moderate backgrounds, who come from Chicago area, that come from the collar counties, right? Some of us, very few of us, actually represent districts that are not majority Latino, right? So we also come with that background as well, right? So for me, for example, I represent a suburban district. I represent a district that currently at the moment is majority white, but now in the next year, it's going to, for the first time, be a majority minority district. It's still not Latino majority, right? So we're coming with like different, we at the end of the day have to look at our districts, right? And see like what's in it for our districts. But then as a Latino caucus, we go into these spaces talking about what are these policies that we're doing? How are they going to affect Latinos? And the more that we are able to be together, the more powerful that our caucus becomes. So I think that, Netza, I know that that was a really lengthy answer to say that there's power in unity. There's also power in collaborative efforts and also healthy conflict. If there's one thing that I've learned through the years is that the most wonderful thing that you could have in a team is collaborative conflict that comes out of love, conflict that comes from wanting to see people grow. And that's what we've been able to achieve.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know it's a very complex answer. You can take days to answer that, but once again, thank you, Dagmara. We love you. We support you, and we're with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative, was something you just said, you were talking about the issues specific to your community and getting them across in environments or areas where you're not the majority. So how do you get what is seen as an interest or issues that are particular to you and have other people see themselves or the benefit to their community or the benefit overall?
Thank you, Philip, for that question. I think, one of the things that I set out to do when I first decided to run for office, or one of the main challenges, I should say, is how do I go from, doing a lot of building within the immigration realm into the mainstream, right? And I think it starts with us individually, right? Thinking around the fact that while immigration personally is something that's defined me as a person, there's a whole bunch of intersectionalities that we care about, right? I might care about immigration, but I also know that if we don't have affordable healthcare, that is a red flag, that if we don't have good jobs, that is something that we also need to aspire and continue to work on. If we don't have living wages, we know that at the end of the day, who does that affect, right? Usually it tends to be people of color who are low income. So looking into meeting people where they were at, which required a lot of research. And when I say a lot of research, the research that I embark on is door knocking, right? And door knocking is the best type of research that you could do. If you want to find out what does that community want, you go to the community and you talk to them and you ask them about what are the issues that they care about. Now, I will say, going to somebody's door unannounced and asking them about like, hey, what are the issues that you care about? You're not going to get a lot. you're not going to get a lot, but it is important to continue to build that community to say like, hey, I want to introduce myself. This is what I'm running on. What do you think about this? And having questions that lead to more conversations. It's what allows for us to build a platform of the 85th district where you could say like, we want to talk about better jobs. We know through data, right, that people who become US citizens have access to better jobs, right? So that's how I make that connection. When we talk about the education to prison pipeline, I also talk about career migration, right? And the connections between the immigration legal system and the criminal justice system. So I think that for me, what has helped a lot is just looking at those areas where we intersect and focusing on that, knowing that when it comes to immigration and when it comes to immigrants, we don't just care about immigration. There's a plethora of other issues that we care about too.
That was excellent.
Awesome. So let me take you back to the moment where you decided to leave organizing and leave the lucrative world of nonprofit administration to become a candidate. Can you take us to that moment? I'm sure there was maybe a moment, there were maybe a few moments where you said, okay, my hat is in the ring.
That, that's an interesting question because the story is a story that's going to take me maybe like an hour, but I'll make it really quick and I'll do it into a minute. We had our state senator that retired and, organizers and also not-for-profit workers. See, the thing is that a lot of people who work in not-for-profit, and please feel free to push back and correct me if I'm wrong, many of us work for not-for-profits and live in the community where we're seeking to do change, right? So while I was working at the Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, there was also a local organization, the Southwest Suburban Immigrant Project, that was organizing in Bolingbrook. So while I had my hat of program director at ICIRR, in my downtime, I would be helping SSIP because helping South Suburban Immigrant Project meant helping my community here in my area. And I was also able to take that knowledge back to this statewide organization to say like, hey, the kind of messaging that we're trying to push here in Chicago, it's not going to work in the collar counties. And these are the reasons why, right? So long story short, when there was an open seat, and just so you know, open seats don't happen a lot. They just don't. So whenever there's an open seat, there's an opportunity for new blood. And the way that this came about, it was actually, I was organized by community leaders in the area. And it truly happened that way because we went from a meeting of maybe a dozen of leaders talking about we need to make sure that we have somebody who has Latino and immigrant rights issues also at the forefront. How do we make sure that we seek out representation when we are close to 30% of the population here in Will County? How do we make sure that we get a senator who will have an open ear to our issues and that whenever we request a meeting, will be able to sit down with us? That is how we came out of that. And that's how we came into this conversation, and how we came out of that conversation was we need one of our own. And when we talked about needing one of our own, we literally went across the room, and it was who is able to run, right? So if you're undocumented, you can't. If you're documented, you can't. If you're a legal permanent resident, you can't. And a lot of our community leaders who would be amazing people that could run for office, unfortunately can't do it because of their immigration status. So that's one thing that's still in the back of my head as to like when we talk about bench building, what are these other spaces that people can occupy beyond being a legislator? Out of that conversation, there was somebody who decided to run for state senator that we supported. So then that meant, who was our previous state representative. So then that meant that state representative seat became open. And the only person that actually lived in that area that was able to run was me. And I was very hesitant about it because I love working behind the scenes. I'm a data person. I look at data and then I move into action. I don't like to speak at press conferences. I don't like to be the face of anything because quite honestly, when you build a movement surrounding one person, my opinion is that that's dangerous. Because if you're not in a space where you're able to move and you're able to create leaders where you have not just one person, but dozen people, then that's when you truly create community and community power. I was out organized by our leaders to say that, you've worked in non-for-profit, you've worked at the state level, you've secured funding for organizations at the state level, a lot of the people there and the relationships that you've built, you are actually the right candidate. And it took a couple of days for me to think about, why me, right? And I think that many of us, unfortunately, fall in this thing of like, we don't necessarily see ourselves, we see ourselves supporting leaders and we see ourselves supporting candidates, but we don't necessarily see ourselves as the candidates themselves. I think we need to change that narrative where we need to start seeing us as our leaders, as the person who has that power of that finger that gets to vote yes or no on legislation.
Well, again, you made such a statement there that we need to have another flag that I'm going to put in my living room. We don't see ourselves as leaders, but the lesson here, if nothing else, is we are the leaders we're looking for. Look no further than this call. And part of our job as organizational leaders who have resources behind us is to make these pathways available for our people, including the people on this call. So if you're on this call and you thought, I don't know, I don't feel like a state representative, I don't feel like a mayor, you know what I mean? No, you are exactly what we need. And so thank you for lifting that story up.
Yeah, and I think I just end up with this. The road to becoming a legislator was not non-linear. If you would have told me 3 years ago that this is what I was going to end up doing, I would have said, absolutely not. I'm going to go ahead and finish my master's, and that's what I'm setting out to do. And I'm going to continue to work in non-for-profit. I honestly see the work that I do in the legislature as an extension of the work that I was doing, right? Which is to seek out power and representation for communities that have been left behind over and over again. So let's not stop. Today is just the beginning.
Wow. Jane, do you want to say anything to close out our visit?
No, just a huge thank you again, Rep. I think your words are always inspiring, and just the way that you share your story and the work that you've done. Just truly appreciate everything. And thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This was very inspiring to me personally, and hopefully to the whole group. As Netza said, you epitomize what we're trying to do. So thank you.
I'm really glad, and thank you all for providing the space for me, and providing the space also for all of all of you are leaders in your own of your own, right? And don't let anybody take that away from you. I think that's what I want to leave everybody with.
Thank you again, Representative Avelar.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
The 85th District of Illinois.
That's right. Thank you. Bye.
Any reactions, thoughts from our visit?
Well, I would say, Tom, given where we're going with the last part of what you said, it's a kind of the Uncle Sam from the war, we want you. And that's kind of the charge here. And I'm wondering, has anybody been inspired at least to think about themselves in this space and to go through what she had to go through mentally? Hey, maybe I am the leader that we're looking for, and seeing that possibility for yourselves. I'm just wondering if anybody has that. There are people on this call I would pick out, but I want you to, what do you think? Just yes or no, is this something that you've ever thought of or would want to do?
I have worked in the courts. I was an interpreter in the courts, and I have seen how my community has gone through so many different things because they don't know, or just because they don't. It can be easily avoided if our representatives will come out and say, these are the things, this is how civic works. And I'm always go back to the same thing. Those negative consequences of encountering with the law has to do because people come and they don't know how this country works. And I have think that our representatives or our nonprofits who will come out here and start teaching those things to our communities will have a better way of doing things. Also, I am an immigrant and I'm married to an immigrant from Jordan. And so I know how immigration has affected my family, my own, and we go from promises to promises with immigration system. I mean, we are so strong in numbers, but yet so weak in actions. Our representatives, they're trying to, they promise a lot of things. The current president or the administration has promised, rainbows and lollipops to the immigrant community, and nothing has happened. Nothing. We keep, people are still coming into the country to become a less of another class because they cannot work legally. They don't have access to funds. They don't have access to health insurance because they don't have the right to be here or the right to do so. So, and yet the administration keep promising those things and nothing is happening. Nothing happens. So yeah, we have to have people who will want to do this kind of work and to bring it to the table and say, yeah, no, there's not going to be no more empty promises. And every administration is the same thing. The Obama administration have the same promise for us. Didn't happen. 2 terms. Biden administration, the same thing. Nothing happened. And it looks like nothing's going to happen again. So yeah, you wonder if you can make a difference by working or trying to figure it out what you can do to make it happen. Yeah.
Awesome.
Felicia, you have my vote. I'm in the chat. If we've got yes votes for Felicia, whatever it is, just to put it in there. Say yes. Right?
We are too kind.
Anybody else? We could get a whole slate on this call, from representative to alderman.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
This is Amma Johnson. I've been listening in, and I could have gone on. I wanted to ask Representative Avelar, especially about the resources and the funding. One of the biggest things that has stopped me personally as a person that wants to throw her hat in the ring is the money that it takes to run. And I would have loved to talk to her about how she went about that, but I understand it was an open race. So it may, that changes things when you actually have somebody else that you're running against, that you have to use money to, for marketing and all those things. So if we could speak to that in terms of, because I know for me, that's something that has stopped me from running, is where do you get the money?
Well,
that support?
Well, that's a good point. And when we do our campaign school later in the spring, we'll invite everyone to come to campaign school. Maybe the coalition will sponsor this campaign school. We'll talk about that, because here's another tip. As a nonprofit organizer, you have the fundraising skills needed. You have the assets in place needed for small campaigns. So imagine a longer session with the representative. We would ask her to take us back to the day when she was a full-time organizer. Maybe she was part of the PTA. We would get her to unpack her networks. And my guess is that she probably had like a Rolodex of 1,000 people or maybe more, just from her personal work, right? And the fact that she said she doesn't like to speak in public, but I would guess to you that she probably spoke in public 100 times, as in her role as an organizer. In other words, we would do like a little assets inventory. And you would learn that a lot of the people on this call already have most of the piece parts needed for a robust grassroots campaign, including you, Amma. That's kind of how I would respond to that, in a first brush.
And let me, from my own background, full disclosure, I worked on Chuy Garcia's mayoral campaign. I've known Chuy a long time. And the reason I jumped on that campaign was because I recognized, because of his community organizing work, he had connections all over the city in a way that didn't even exist in the Democratic Party. Most of the machine doesn't exist like it was in terms of on the ground organization across community areas. But this guy, because of his work as an organizer, there's connections, and that organizing base is an army that can really show its strength in a citywide election. And he shocked the world. He scared the then Mayor Rahm Emanuel into putting on sweaters and playing nice. But that was just because of the sheer power of numbers, of that network and those connections that you all have in the organizing and nonprofit area that does not exist for just a regular person brought to candidacy from, say, the business community. So that people power can beat money power. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Other reactions to our guest and what she shared? Any other thoughts, responses?
Somebody has their hand.
Go ahead, Juan.
Juan.
All right. Thank you guys for putting this together. So what I got from Dagmara's speech, she said something along the lines that she went from moving from a place where she had to hide to a place where now she can represent what she was and what she is, which I thought was very powerful. Well, for me personally, because what we're trying to do is we're empowering our communities by giving them the knowledge to know their rights, to know what they can do, and their limits as well. So I think that has a lot to do with today's presentation, and that's just something that really stuck with me because we're empowering the community.
Awesome. She went from a place where she was hiding, not a leader. How could she be a leader? She's hiding. She's afraid. She's running away. All these negative images of no power and no thought of leadership to being a representative in the State House, writing the laws, passing the budgets. I mean, what more can we say in that this is a possible thing? And she said it was a non-linear. It's like she said, if you had asked me 5 years ago, Dagmar, you're going to be a state representative someday, she would say, what are you crazy? No, I got this, I got that, I got a full plate with my work. No, that's for somebody else. And so there's another thing too, that this is true in politics. Women have to be asked 9 times. But men, you just ask us 1 time. Hey, Tom, you want to be a brain surgeon? Yeah, sure. So there's a thing there that is also true in our politics. And so she said she was asked. So I put yourself back in that room when the leaders were thinking about who should run and she did not jump up. Did you hear her story? She was more like in the background, like, well, I'm going to help someone run. I'm going to figure it out. I'll be one of the helper people. So she wasn't fronting herself in that conversation. And someone said to her, no, you're the one. You're the one. And
well, it sounded to me like if you're the only one, like you're the one that's qualified. And it was almost like thrust upon her. And people often say that leadership is something that's often thrust upon you.
And we're trying to say here, put yourself forward a little more. We're saying seek out these opportunities with confidence. I guess we're saying
that you have everything you need.
You have everything you need. That's right. You have most of the things you need to do this work. And so as we come to the conclusion of this presentation, it's just a pretty naked call. My friends and comrades, this is the conclusion of our civic engagement workshops and for the entire cycle of training for the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition cohort from the Civic Lab. Oh, Juan, you want to say something? Go ahead, brother.
Yeah. What another thing too is, like, from what we can learn from the representative is that, for instance, people saw in her, right, something, and so they knew that she had the leadership in capacity and skill inside of her. Perhaps she wasn't aware. So as we that out there in the community, that's probably what we can do, is keep an eye open, perhaps not for us, but for to encourage people like her, who sometimes they think they may not believe in themselves, they might not think that they have it inside, but perhaps what we can do is we can give them a push, encourage them.
Keep our eyes open.
Mhm.
And give them encouragement. Or as you say, push. Yes, I say so. That's part of what we're trying to do right here today. We are encouraging everyone on this call and all across the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition, both in the immigration cohorts and our colleagues in the justice cohorts. We are encouraging you, we're pushing you, we're begging you, actually, that your appetite for this work has been whetted and you are ready for some more. And we are hoping that some of us on this call and your colleagues will actually be on the ballot in 2024, or that you will help others to run, as you have seen your colleague Dagmar Avila as the path that she has led for, and that you will follow in that. All right. That being said, we've talked about a lot of things in our trainings. The floor is open for really any comments or questions, not just from this workshop, but for any of the things that we've talked about in our work together.
Well, I wanted to share. Rep. Avelar texted me after, and she had a really great time engaging with you all. And she also suggested like meeting with the legislators in your local districts. I think that's a way to like continue learning and hopefully like motivating folks like Felicia to run. But just like I'm really excited for this space and able to like learn and share with each other.
Awesome. Duly noted. Any comments at all, not just from this session, but from any of the things we covered, or anything that's alive for you now? Please, we have a few minutes.
Well, I just want to say thank you for this great series. It has taught me a lot. I learned a lot, and I thank you for your time and for the kind words that you have for our community. Thank you for being a partner with us. We don't see that often, but I do thank you for that and from our community, because you're making us better.
Oh, it is our pleasure and honor to be your journeyman along with this path that we're all walking on. By your students you shall be taught, is what they say, and that has been true. Well, then finally, we ask you to go to this evaluation one more time, if you wouldn't mind. I'll put it into the chat. Well, as I say, as you are taking a few minutes to fill out the evaluation, this workshop concludes the training sequence offered by the Civic Lab for the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition's immigration cohort. We thank you, we thank Jane for inviting us to be part of your work, and we hope to see you again, maybe at another workshop real soon. But in the meantime, please stay safe, sane, and strong.